Alright guys, so you should be able to see my screen here. I'm doing things a little bit differently today. Rather than the traditional PowerPoint slide deck that you can see at any presentation, including ours, we do a lot of PowerPoint slide decks in ours. I'm doing a little bit different approach here, and we'll see how it comes across through a web meeting. It may not have the same effect over the web. But I'm using a different kind of software here for my presentation. I'll kind of get that out of the way. In case you're interested in it, you can see it in the bottom left here. It's actually a website called Prezi, where you can create little presentations here, and they're pretty interactive and really focus your attentions on certain areas. So our discussion for today is we're going to be talking about PowerView, and not just PowerView, but how to create an end-to-end PowerView solution. So many of you have probably seen PowerView presentations at this point. In fact, on the Pragmatic Works free training website, there's probably half a dozen of them that you can view. But what's different about this session is I'm not only going to show you how to build a report using PowerView, but I'm going to take you end to end. So what is required to do PowerView? What does it take to build a model that can be used for reporting in PowerView, and really take us all the way beginning to end. So we'll start building out our model, and then we'll go all the way through to building out the report. You'll see that we're going to go back and forth quite a bit. So this is our agenda. We're going to talk first about what is PowerView, what is it all about. We'll talk about what the requirements are to use PowerView. And then finally, we'll get into our end-to-end demo. We will start off by building out a Powerpivot model that will be our data source that we'll use. And the reason I'm starting off with this end-to-end reporting solution is because I want you to see what you need to do inside of the model that will make it more optimal for PowerView. Because there's a lot of settings and tweaks that you can do in your model to make sure that PowerView uses it to its best ability. Okay? All right, so let's talk about, see, I'm using new software, and look, I'm already messing up. Let's talk about what is PowerView, and then we'll get into the details of why you would use it, and what really does it do for you? What needs does it fulfill? Okay? So first, let's talk about what is PowerView. PowerView is a highly interactive reporting tool, and you can see I have a little image of it here in a moment that I will actually zoom in on in a moment as well. It's very good at doing things like ad hoc reporting. So I have a lot of business users that really want to build out their own reports. They don't want to wait for IT to create reports. PowerView is a perfect solution for that. It's also highly end-user capable. So I just mentioned this just my last sentence here. It's very easy for an end user to be able to handle and build out reports using PowerView. It's not nearly as complicated as some of the other reporting tools. In fact, I kind of make this analogy. If they're able to do Excel pivot tables, then they're going to be able to do PowerView. The difficulty level is about the same, and really they'll find that they get a lot more use out of PowerView because of all the interactive functionality that's natively built into it, and also the ability to handle things like images really well in the data. We'll talk about that a little bit more. And we're able to create these really nice reports like you see here. This report here just shows the car sales over time, but really this could be anything that's part of your data. And you don't have to have images in your data, but it certainly makes a more impressive report when you can bring in images. Now let's talk about what need this fills. So what is PowerView doing for us that we couldn't do previously? Now, PowerView is actually considered part of reporting services. So, and it's part of SQL Server 2012, and there's some other things that we'll talk about later when it comes to the requirements for doing PowerView. But really, it's part of the reporting services suite. And you have several different options when it comes to reporting services. And these the first two options that you'll see right here have been around for a while. The ones that I just highlighted on the screen here, the Report Designer and Report Builder, are options that you've had for quite a number of versions of SQL Server. The Report Designer method is, you have your traditional developer, and that developer goes out and he opens up his Visual Studio or his SQL Server data tools or bids, whatever version of SQL Server you're using. He opens up Visual Studio and builds out these really, really impressive reports. Now those reports are great because they can be highly customizable. They're able to modify colors, and they're able to bring in tables and images and charts to be in the exact pixel of the report that they want. And they're able to create some fairly impressive reports. They can even build dashboards from that report designer. So that's the traditional way of doing reporting services. It's traditionally more of a static reporting tool. So once you get the data elements into your report, That's what you have. So what you see is what you get. And then we've kind of transitioned over the last couple iterations of SQL Server to have a more power user tool like Report Builder. Report Builder is a tool that allows end users to have just about all the same functionality that the developer would have when they're developing in Visual Studio, but it simplifies it and it makes a lot of the things easier to find. It gives more of an office look and feel to building out reports. So they actually have whenever they launch Report Builder, it looks like they're working in Office, so it's something they're very familiar with. And it makes life a lot easier. There's things like report parts that they're able to consume inside Report Builder, and it makes it so that they can actually take pieces of a report that a developer created and add it to their own. So a lot of the same functionality is carried over there, but in a much more easy to understand tool to develop in. Some disadvantages, of course, by using that end user reporting tool, you can only work on one report at a time, and there's a few other things as well. So those have been the two traditional ways of building reports in the past. With the release of SQL Server 2012, that's been a while now, but since 2012, there was a new type of reporting tool, and this is the code name for it, but it's now called PowerView. Project Crescent was the code name for it. PowerView is really for anybody. Like I said, if your users can do pivot tables, then they can do PowerView. It's a highly interactive visual experience, and it's really is used for data exploration. They're able to bring those reports bring those data elements into a PowerView report and create some very, very impressive reports. Okay, now this is more of an end user tool because it is so simple to do. You want to hand it off to them so that they can start creating these reports on their own. And it's also going to allow them to export to other presentation layer tools like PowerPoint. So when I purposely said PowerPoint here, you can actually export PowerView reports into PowerPoint so that they can make it part of their presentations to their board, for example. Okay? So how is PowerView different from the traditional methods of reporting? Well, it doesn't quite have the pixel-perfect reporting. And again, when I say pixel-perfect, that means I'm able to highly customize my report so that I can get it exactly in the spot I want, and I can rename any column I see, and I can change any colors that I see as well. PowerView has some customizable features, but it's a little limiting. PowerView is not that pixel-perfect reporting tool where I can change column names and I can change colors. But you can change colors to a point, but you also are a little bit limited there as well. So there are some differences here, and you'll see quite a bit of differences whenever we get actually into the reporting tool itself. Okay. All right, so let's now talk about requirements. So what do you need to do PowerView? It's nice that we know what it is now. It's a highly interactive tool, which is easy to do. I told you any user can do it. They don't have to be a power user. What is required to do PowerView? So this is my slide here, or basically a slide here, that goes through the different possible paths that you can use to build out a PowerView solution. So the first path, the more traditional path, is first of all you have to have SQL Server 2012. So 2012 is a must. And then the second is Sharepoint 2010. And it's Enterprise. So it's actually SQL Server 2012 Service Pack 1 and SharePoint 2010 Enterprise. Now, of course, if you have 2013 Enterprise, that works as well. But the bare minimum is that you need to have SharePoint 2010. Okay. You also were required to have Silverlight. All of the functionality that's built into PowerView as of right now, and there's potential for this to change, but as of right now, it does require that you use Silverlight. If you're unfamiliar with Silverlight, it's basically Microsoft's version of Flash. But that's how you're able to actually build reports, and that's how you're able to deliver reports to your users so they can view them. So Silverlight is part of the actual building experience. So anytime you're building a report, it's on top of a Silverlight solution. And then anytime a user views a report, it's also using Silverlight 5. Okay. So that's the first path. That's been the path of how you would create PowerView reports initially. When PowerView was first brought out, that was how you had to do it. But within the last, I guess it's been the last 6 months or so, there's a new path, a new way to do PowerView reports, and that's using Excel 2013. So Excel 2000, or really Office 2013, is pretty new to most folks. So I would imagine a very small percentage of you actually are using Office 2013. But if you do have Office 2013, the Power View functionality is actually built into Office or built into Excel. So no longer do you have to have SharePoint. You can simply build out your own Power View reports from inside of Excel 2013. It does, however, still require that you use Silverlight. So Silverlight does have to be downloaded to do Power View inside of Excel. But the ultimate goal there, of course, is to build out those Power View reports. Now, those are more of the system requirements. Let's talk about things like data source requirements. So what kind of requirements would I have to actually pull in data into Power View? Okay, so we talked about system requirements. Those being you have to have SQL Server 2012 if you're trying to make more of an enterprise solution where others can see it in SharePoint. And then we talked about more the personal solution where I can create my own personal Power View reports would be the Excel 2013 option. Now let's talk about data. So as of right now, there's only two types of data sources that can be used to pull into Power View. One of which is a BI semantic model, a tabular model that you've created. Okay, so this is the new SQL Server 2012 version of Analysis Services. If you create a tabular model, you can then deploy out a data source of a tabular model to SharePoint and then use that to build Power View reports on. The other option, which I've seen be the most popular option right now, and this is what I'm going to demo for you later, is to publish a Powerpivot workbook into SharePoint. The benefit of doing this is you can have this all driven by your end user. The end user or power user could build out a Power View report or Powerpivot workbook where they do all their modeling and bring together their multiple data sources. They deploy that workbook off to the SharePoint library, and then they can build a Power View report on top of it. Okay, so either way, and you'll see here I have a special note there that says that the multidimensional versions of Analysis Services will soon, it's probably going to be the next version of SQL Server, will allow you to actually build reports on multidimensional as well. So if you're unfamiliar with the new versions of Analysis Services in 2012, there's really two of them. Multidimensional is the one that you're used to, and you probably have built cubes on previously. And then the new method is tabular, which is basically Powerpivot for the server. Okay. Now, as of right now, like I just said, multidimensional is not available. There is a customer preview out on the web that you can download that will show you that you will eventually be able to do multidimensional data sources in Power View. But as of right now, for current releases, it's not possible. Now, under the covers, what happens is it uses a query language called DAX. DAX is the query language used for Powerpivot and Tabular. That query language, you don't have to know how to do. As a report writer, if you're writing Power View reports, you do not have to know how to write DAX. That's all what happens under the covers. As you do your drag and drop reporting, those queries are written for you automatically, and they're passed down to the server. Okay? So that's data source requirements. Let's talk about actually creating reports. So when we're ready to build out some reports that we want to use, what is it going to take and what benefits do we get? So let's talk about that. First things first, the nice thing that you can do is you can have what they call views. You can have multiple views, and each of those views can share a filter so that they're all filtered down to a particular filter. So I want to filter this view to show only a certain year's worth of data, that kind of thing. But basically a view is equivalent to a page. So I can have multiple pages in my report essentially here. And you can see here a little representation of where I have one view that has several different visualizations in it on the top right, where I'm using a scatter chart, bar chart, and several other column charts there as well. And then on the left-hand side, I have a basic column chart. So I'm able to have all these multiple views come together into a single report. And again, a view is basically like a page on a report. Okay. Now you also can leverage images really well, and you'll see this as we do our demo today, is Power View can handle images, and it handles them extremely well. So when we build out a report, if you have images in your data, or even if you have just a URL that points off to an image that you have, you can leverage that inside your model and then expose it through to Power View reports. So what you're seeing right here on this image is a listing of a bunch of products. And we can actually see a screenshot of each of those products whenever we select one of them. And you'll see that whenever we build out our end-to-end demo here where you can leverage those images. Now you can also Export your reports. So you have a couple options. Obviously, you could print a report. That's nothing new to you. You can save your reports into a SharePoint library, so that way they're visible to everyone else, and they can go view the reports later. And the last one, which is a really nice new feature, is that you can export your reports to PowerPoint. Yes, PowerPoint. If I were actually using a PowerPoint slide deck today, I could take the results of our demo that we're going to do, and I could export it to my PowerPoint slide deck. The beautiful thing about that is I'm sure many of you have been in board meetings or meetings in general where executives or maybe the reporting person has actually taken screenshots of a report and pasted those screenshots into the PowerPoint slide deck. The beautiful thing about PowerView is they no longer have to take those screenshots, because what's going to happen is they can export their PowerView report to PowerPoint, and then they can interact with it just as if they were viewing the live version of the report. So it's a lot of nice new functionality that you have with PowerView. Okay. All right, guess what? We're ready for demos. I didn't want to have too many slides or bounce around too much with this new presentation option here. Again, if you're just logging in, I've used the new presentation tool here called Prezi. You can see it in the bottom left of my screen. And it's just a different way of presenting. I kind of opted not to do a slide deck this time. So what we're going to demo here is we're going to create a small Powerpivot workbook. We're going to deploy that Powerpivot workbook to a gallery, Powerpivot Gallery, on SharePoint. And then we're going to develop some PowerView reports, multiple PowerView reports. And we're going to go back and forth between our model that we create inside Powerpivot and our PowerView report to show how we can do things in the model that will actually expose new functionality inside of our reporting solution. Okay? All right, so I want to back out of this for a moment, out of the presentation tool. And I am going to show you a couple things here first before we jump right into creating a model. Is I want to take this whole entire demo as if I'm an analyst. All right, so I'm a business analyst. I've heard about PowerView. I'm learning how to use it. I've learned a little bit, and I find that it's a tool that I can learn how to use and get comfortable with. But I also have heard with this PowerView tool that it can handle images, right? I know it can handle images, so I want to somehow pull in images of my data so that I can leverage that inside my reports that I build. So I actually have, because I'm a business analyst, I don't know how to get on the server, or I'm not going to go on the server, I should say. I'm not going to go on the server and place these images. I'm actually just going to put these images that I know and have found on my SharePoint site. So we're looking at a SharePoint site here, and this is a list of all of my images of our products. And I can view any of these images and see that it's an image of, in this case, a helicopter here. Okay, this is my data set is a toy company. Okay. So you can go through any of these images and really view what the image of the product would look like. Okay, so I want to leverage those, and we'll come to that eventually, but we're going to take little baby steps through here first. I'm going to create a basic model, and then we'll get more and more complicated with bringing in things like images. But keep in mind, I'm doing this from the perspective of I'm an analyst. All right, so we know that if we're going to do we already said we're going to do Powerpivot. Powerpivot is going to be my data source that I use to build out my PowerView report. Now, if we're doing Powerpivot, we have to start in Excel. I'm using Excel 2013 today, but this could have been Excel 2010 as well. Powerpivot is available in 2010 as a free add-in, and 2013, it's just natively built into the tool. Okay. Now, once you have Powerpivot, by the way, if you have to download Powerpivot, it's at powerpivot.com. Go figure. You can go download it, and then it'll install the free add-in for you if you're using 2010. Now, I've already have those things taken care of. I've already have this installed. So you can see that I have a Powerpivot tab up top. And I'm going to select the Manage button over here and underneath my Powerpivot tab so that I can create my model that will be used for my report. Okay, so I'll select Manage here. And this is going to launch open the Powerpivot window. And in this Powerpivot window, this is where I'll start bringing in my different data elements. So right now, I can see that I can pull in from a database, which is probably what I'm going to do today. But just know that you have a lot of other options. If I selected from other sources, you have a slew of other options that you can use for pulling in data. You can even pull in from another Excel file, or I can pull in from a reporting services report. Really, a neat functionality that a lot of people aren't using yet is the Azure Data Market. The marketplace here has quite a few different data sources that are public, some for free, some for purchase, that you can pull in public data. So that's a real neat option that you'll have available to you now. Now for our demo here, I'm going to stay inclusive to what I have on my machine. So I'm going to pull in from a database, and I'm going to be using a SQL Server database today. It could be Access, it could be Oracle, really any kind of ODBC connection that you can create, you can pull in data from here. All right, so I'm going to pull in my server, which is my local instance here. So I'm just going to type in my local server name. And then my database that I'll be using is the Tailspin Toys database. This is just like I mentioned earlier, it's a toy company that has a bunch of model airplanes and helicopters and that sort of thing. Okay, so this is just making my connection to my data source. I'll hit Next. All right, now you have two options for pulling in data. I can either select from a list of tables or views and just check off which objects I want to bring in, or if I'm more of a power user or I'm a developer, I may want to choose the option to write a query. So I can write a query and pull in those different data elements that I'd like. Again, I'm playing the role of a BA or an analyst. So I don't know great details about writing queries. Maybe I know a little bit, but I'm more comfortable selecting from tables or views here. So I'll select the default option and hit Next. All right, so now from here, this just gives us a list of all of our tables that we want to use, and I can select them easily here just by either checking each one I would like to include, or I can select the fact table. In this case, that's the one that has all my relationships built together from. I can select that fact table and hit Select Related Tables down here in the bottom. Based on relationships that I have in my source database, it'll pull in every other table that has a direct relationship to it. Okay? So you can see that's been done here. Now it also there's another table here that it did not pick up, and the reason it didn't pick up this dim region table is because it's more of a snowflake where it doesn't have that direct relationship. It actually has to go through another table, in this case the state table, to pull it in. I'm going to go ahead and pull in the dim region table, or I can just hit this Select Related Tables again, and it'll pull in that snowflake relationship I have. Okay, so not too difficult. I'm just bringing in the tables I want to use here. Now what I do recommend at this point is to go ahead and rename your tables. You see you have these friendly names here. Friendly names are just what it's going to expose whenever you deploy this off to your Sharepoint site. So I want this to be as user ready as possible. And a lot of my users don't know what a dim or a fact is, so I want to rename these and just take off dim and fact so it's real obvious on what we're dealing with here. I have a date table, I have a product table, or a region table, state, and sales. Okay, so it takes a little confusion out of this so it's real clear on what each of these tables are doing. All right, once I have that, I'll hit Finish. And now it's actually going to pull in the data. It's physically pulling the data out of the database, my SQL Server database, and placing it in Excel. So it's not leaving a connection to Excel. It's actually brought the data into Excel, and the data now lives in Excel. So the only time I have to reach back out to my database is if I need to pull in new data. Okay. There's also a whole methodology of scheduling the data refresh that you can do all through SharePoint. Okay, but we'll save that for another time. All right, so I've brought in each of my tables that I want. I'll hit Close. And this is going to pull in each of those data elements or tables into Powerpivot. Okay. Now you can see on the bottom here I have each of my tables. I can tab between each of the tables that I've created. But for now, I think what we want to do is I'm going to create one object, just one little object here, and then we're going to go over to Power View and see what we can do with this very basic model that we've created so far. Okay. So what I'd like to do is I want to create a hierarchy. If you've played with Powerpivot in the past, hierarchies actually weren't a capability until they had version 2 of Powerpivot. But when they released version 2, it gave you some new capabilities like creating hierarchies. And that capability has been around for about a year plus now. Now, if I want to create hierarchies, I cannot do it from the view that we're currently looking at. I actually have to flip over to what they call the diagram view. You can get to the diagram view either in the little ribbon up top here. You can see there's a button here called Diagram View. Right there. Oops, I meant to do an arrow. Or you can go into the bottom right and select the diagram view there as well. Either way, it takes you to the same place, which gives you what looks like more of a database diagram view of your model. Okay, so we can see this is what my model looks like and a basic look and feel of what to expect whenever we get to the reporting layer. Now what I'd like to do is I want to create a very basic hierarchy just to show you that that capability exists now in Powerpivot. And I'm going to do this based on our product table. Okay, so you can do this one of two ways. You can click this Create Hierarchy button that I'm zooming in on right now. But my preference is actually to make it where this is a little easier to see and a little easier to read. So just to the right of that Create Hierarchy button, there's this Maximize button. And this Maximize button gives you a full view of this table, so it's easier to create your hierarchy for you. Now that I have this Maximize view, I'll hit this Create Hierarchy button. I'll name my hierarchy Product Drill Down. Again, this is all for end-user purposes. So at this point, if my user is more comfortable with the word drill down versus hierarchy, then I'm going to name it specifically for them here. So I'll name this product drill down, and then I'll bring in the names or the columns that I'd like to be part of the drill down. Now you'll notice here that all of my column names, if I have really a two-word product and name are two separate words, you'll notice they're merged together here, and that's just because that's how they were stored in the data source. But now that I'm in the Powerpivot layer, I do have the option to rename these fields. So I could come in here and rename these and say, really there should be a space here between product and name. And really between product category, I'm just going to rename this guy just category. Because I don't have categories of anything else, so I'm going to rename these so it's a little easier. Okay? So I've renamed it on the model side, inside of Powerpivot. Now if I want to make these part of my hierarchy, maybe I want to make category and product name part of my hierarchy, I can select and drag those down to my product drill down. Let me drag it on top of it here. There we go. And it's now created a one-level hierarchy here. Obviously, I want to have product name part of the hierarchy as well, so I'll drag that right below category. Come on. There we go. And now I have that two-level hierarchy where my users can drag in the product drill down, and it gives them the ability to drill into category to see each of the products that are part of that category. Okay? Good enough. So let's do this. Let's leave this as it is. I'm going to minimize or restore the view back to how it was a moment ago. And let's deploy out the results that we have. So I'm going to deploy what we have to the server right now so we can see what is going to be visible inside PowerView, and then we'll work together to modify our PowerView report to really take advantage of some things that are available inside Powerpivot. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and save this. I'm going to go up to my Save menu here. I'm going to point this to my Sharepoint site. So you can just put your Sharepoint URL here. There's also an option inside of Excel where you can say you want to save it to Sharepoint. Either way, it should take you to the same location here. And just in case, I'm going to copy this out. Let me do it the easy way. I can go File, Save As. You'll see there's a Sharepoint option here. I'll select that I want to go to my Powerpivot Gallery. Okay, and here's my Powerpivot Gallery. So this is a gallery that stores Powerpivot workbooks, and it's also where you can do things like data refreshes and build out PowerView reports. Okay, so I'm going to call this my Pragmatic Works PW demo, and I'll save it. Okay, so you'll notice down the bottom, it's actually uploading our workbook to SharePoint. Okay, I'm not saving anything local here, although it's probably a good idea to have a local copy of this. I'm saving everything straight out into SharePoint. Okay, so I can minimize all this. In fact, I'm going to go back to more of my client machine here, and this is my Powerpivot site. Okay, so this is a SharePoint 2013 instance that we're looking at, and inside my Powerpivot Gallery, I can see that there should be showing up here eventually my PW demo, which is what we just deployed a moment ago. Okay. Now you'll see this little time icon here, this little icon that's indicating it's loading something. This is what it's doing while it's loading the preview here. You can see the one below it actually has a preview of the report. That's just kind of taking its time to load out that preview of my PW demo. If I refresh this, it's probably loaded at this point. Yep, there it is. So I didn't have anything on my initial worksheet, but as we build out these PowerView reports, we'll see another listing here below PW demo and below voter data Powerpivot that has my PowerView reports. Now, if I wanted to create a PowerView report on this model that we just created, I can do so by going up into the top right here, and you have three options. The first one here is you can open this and view it in Excel. Second option here is to create a PowerView report, which is what we want to do. And then the third one here is to actually schedule data refreshes. So if I wanted to make sure that this Powerpivot workbook never had stale data, then I could schedule a refresh to occur during non-business hours or once an hour or whatever my preference is. I can create a scheduling agent there to refresh my data. Okay. Now, again, for our purposes here, we want to create a Power View report, so I'll select Create a Power View report in the middle, and this is going to launch Power View. Now, again, if you remember from our little presentation that we looked at in the beginning, Power View relies very heavily on Silverlight right now. I emphasize right now. So any reports that we create, you'll notice I'm still in a web interface. I'm still in my web browser. Because it's using Silverlight, is that basically Microsoft's version of Flash to be able to allow me to create these reports. That's also how you view the reports as well. Now this is the reporting interface here, and you'll notice as we start to build out some of these reports, it's really small and it's hard to see initially. Don't worry, whenever we get to actually viewing this as a user, that it'll be fine, it'll be easier to read, but I just want to warn you about that ahead of time because a lot of people usually note that it's difficult to read initially. Okay, so here's what I want to do. Again, I'm an analyst. I know enough to create a Powerpivot workbook. I deployed it out. Now I want to create a basic report that helps me analyze my sales. So let's call this my sales analysis. Okay. And I'm not going to mess around too much with filters right now, so you'll see I'm going to close this out for now. Just know that I could place a filter on this view of the report, and it filters everything without it being completely obvious, I guess. It's kind of a background filter. I don't necessarily want to do that for this report, but what I would like to do is bring in some different elements. So for example, I'd like to see from my product table, I'd like to see the category. And you'll see all I have to do here is check it off. And I'd also like to see from my sales table, I'd like to bring in my, let's do revenue. Okay. So it's just checking off these different data elements, and you see that it's made a little chart here for me, or really a little table view of my data. Very small, very simple. But the nice thing about Power View is it's really easy to change the type of visualization you're using. So while I still have this table selected, I could easily come up and say that really I'd like to see this as a column chart. And just by selecting that one button up here under visualizations, I've changed this now to a column chart. Very easy, very simple to do. And now inside my report, I'm able to visualize it in a more graphical way. Okay. I'd also like to see some trending of my data. So I know that profitability kind of fluctuates for my company. So I want to see over time, across months, how does my profitability manage, or how does my profitability do? So I'm going to check off from my sales table, profitability. And you'll see it's this, like I said, this is just as easy as doing a pivot table in Excel. I'm just checking off the different objects that I like to see. It's bringing them into the report for me. Now, when I wanted to create a new visualization, when I was done with this one, I just selected somewhere in the background of the report, and it allows me to create a new visualization. Okay, so I'm bringing in profitability, and I'd also like to bring in, let's say from my date table, let's look at month. Okay, and I'd like to see this as more of a trending. I've said I want to see trending of profitability, so I'm going to bring in a line chart just by selecting the line chart up top here so that I can see over time how my company is doing. Okay, that's pretty good. I'll bring this down here. Now the great thing about Power View is it knows that you have these relationships in your model. You've designed this model inside your data source, and it's able to easily connect those relationships inside the reporting layer. So what I mean by that is I can easily select any object that you see or any of these bars that I see as part of my bar chart, and it will filter down the results of my other charts. So this is me selecting a bar, and it filtering the results of other objects that are part of my report. And the way it's able to do this is based on the model we created. We had relationships in our model, and those relationships carried over to the reporting layer here very easily. When I wanted to remove that filter, I just select somewhere in the background of the report, and I'm good to go again. Okay. Now there's a couple things we want to fix here. We can identify some problems pretty quickly. For example, if you look inside of our date table over here, what does this usually represent in Excel? That usually represents that we're trying to summarize something, right? Or we're trying to aggregate it in some way. Well, we have a couple columns in here like date ID, month number. If we go back and look at the sales table, there's a bunch of ID columns in here which probably aren't meant to be aggregated. Those are probably my relationships. I don't want those to be visible to my users because they'll get really confused when they check off product ID and they'll see this number that gets brought across here and be very confused on what it is because it's a meaningless number that we just aggregated. Product ID is just a unique identifying number in the table, and because Powerpivot saw it was an integer, it's trying to aggregate it here. So this is actually something we need to go back and fix in our model. A couple of these columns will hide, and then a couple of these columns, like the, say for example, month number, we just need to change it so it doesn't aggregate on it. The other thing I'd like to do is be able to leverage our images. Remember we talked about the images that I have inside my SharePoint site. I want to use those images in this report so I can see each of my products and be able to filter down by category, for example, like we saw we could do with this bar chart. Okay, so we got a couple fixes to do in our model. So let's go back to our model. I'm going to save the report that we have so far. Okay, just give it a second here. All right, save that. That's now saving it to my SharePoint site. You can see up top here it's saving it to my Powerpivot Gallery. Once that saves, I can always go back and view it in my gallery here. So you can see right here is the report we started. Now what I'd like to do is go back to my model that we worked on just a few moments ago, and I want to do a couple things. The first thing, the easy fix, is I want to hide columns that aren't really necessary for my users to see. So like the ID columns, for example. They don't really need to see these ID columns. They're kind of meaningless to users. So I can come through here and find all those ID columns and hide them. So you can multi-select like I just showed here in the diagram view and right-click and tell it that you want to hide it in Client View, Client Tools. So by right-clicking and saying Hide from Client Tools, you'll see that it just grays them out. Whenever you compare them to the other columns, you can see they're grayed out, which indicates that they're hidden from our users. The other thing I noted that I wanted to fix was in the date table. Inside my date table, when we looked at the month number, it was trying to aggregate it because month number is a number, and PowerView assumed that we wanted to aggregate that to roll up the data, to sum it. So what I'd like to do is I want to fix month number, so instead of aggregating it, it doesn't do anything. It's just a number that really isn't supposed to be aggregated. The way I can do that is I'll select the month number here inside my date table, go up to the Advanced tab at the very top, and then where you see the Summarize By option, I'm going to change the Summarize By to Do Not Summarize. Okay, so this just tells it, I know it's a number, but I don't want to aggregate it. So I'll change Summarize By to Do Not Summarize, and then next time we go look at our model, we won't see the little sum icon or the aggregate icon next to that column. Okay. Now the other thing I wanted to do was I want to leverage images. We talked about inside my SharePoint site that I have these images. I showed you those earlier. They look like this, product images. I want to leverage those images inside my model here. Okay? And what I'm going to have to do to make this work is to use a little bit of DAX. Remember, DAX is the query language that's used for Powerpivot, Tabular, and PowerView leverages as well. Now to write DAX, I can't do it from the diagram view. So the diagram view that we're using right now, I actually like this view, but unfortunately I can't write DAX from it. So if I wanted to write DAX, I'd have to go down to the bottom left here and change back to the grid view. Okay. Now the place I need to write this DAX is on my product table, because again, what I'm trying to do here is I'm trying to return back product images. And when we looked at our SharePoint site, show you this one more time. When we looked at our SharePoint site here, just want to look at our library, we can see that all of our images here are numbers of our product. Okay, so these numbers actually represent a row inside of our table. Okay, so product 2 has an image, product 3 has an image, so on and so forth. And what I'd like to do is concatenate the resulting location of where each of these products are found. So my location for these products is a URL with the product number that we find inside of our table. Okay. Now my mom always told me not to write code in front of people, because, especially in a demo, because you'll likely mess up. So I have out here the DAX query already for it, and I will make sure that I zoom into it and show you exactly what it's doing. Okay. So I'm going to add a brand new column here where it says Add Column. Paste in my DAX statement and hit enter. Okay, so you can see that I've created a brand new column here, It's called calculated column 1. We'll change the name of it in a moment. But basically, I concatenated a hard-coded string with the number that was found inside the table. Okay, so let me show you what exactly we did here in our code. In our code, I had a literal string. Literal string just means hard-coded text here, which I have in the double quotes. I have inside those double quotes the URL where my image is stored. Okay, and then I wanted to leverage a column that I had inside my product table, called product ID here, to pass into my URL string. Okay, so I'm basically concatenating with this little ampersand here. I'm concatenating my product ID with our URL, and then I'm also appending that it's a JPEG on the end. Okay. All right. The last piece that I want to do here is I'll rename that column. I'll just right-click on it and select Rename, and I'll call this my image. Okay. All right, so that's an image of my product. I have it now stored in here. Now, just because I have a column that has a URL with my image location is not good enough. Because if I tried to bring this into my model right now, or if I tried to bring this into PowerView right now, it would just assume that this is string. This is a string value that I'm trying to show on the report. When in reality, I want to take this URL and show the image, not show the URL. Okay, let me show you what I mean. If I save this right now, I'm saving it back off to SharePoint. If I save that right now as it is, and I try to go back to our report that we created earlier, okay, back to our report. If I try to go back to this report and bring in that image column, it's going to bring in the URL string, which is not what we want. Okay, let me show you very quickly, and then we'll go back to fix it in the model. Okay, so I see the image column here. If I check off image, it's going to give us a list of URLs. Not what we were trying to do. What we'd like to do is really actually show the image. So let's go back and let's go fix our model. So what we need to do in our model to make this work is we need to identify the table behavior. And this is done on the Advanced tab. If I go up to my Advanced tab inside Powerpivot, you'll see that you have a couple things that you can play around with here. We already looked at the Summarize By earlier, but I also need to identify the data category for this column. The data category for this column is that it is an image URL. So this is an image, and I have to make sure I identify it as an image, otherwise it won't let me parse that URL and to actually bring down the value, the image instead. All right, so I have the image. The next step is I need to identify the table behavior. So when someone actually brings this column in, how does it know it's an image? Other than the fact that I gave it a data category, that's not good enough. So under the table behavior, here's where you're going to do a couple things. Really, the two properties that we care about most here are on the bottom. Two properties we care about are the default label and the default image. But there is one other property we have to identify, which is what makes the rows unique. So we need, what is the row identifier here? The row identifier in here is the product ID. That's just the unique representation of each of my products. You'll also see that there's a keep unique rows property here. And we don't need to apply this for what we're trying to do today, but a case or a scenario where you may need to use this is if you have type 2 dimensions inside your data warehouse. So if you use type 2 dimensions, then oftentimes you'll have multiple versions of a product in this case. So I may have a row for my red bike, and then when I change a price, for example, let's say I change the price of the red bike, then I want to keep a history of how my sales were with the old price versus how my sales were with the new price. So I'm actually keeping multiple versions of that product so I can track and see as I lower the price by 10%, am I really making that much more money? Now in this, how that relates to this property is if I wanted to uniquely identify an image with a with multiple versions of a product, I need to identify something like the product SKU here, which is more of the business key. Okay. In our case, we don't really have a type 2 dimension, so it's not something we need to do in our scenario here. So we can skip over that. I just wanted to make sure you had an idea of what that was doing. All right, so our default label. Our label here is what do we want to label the image? And the label that we want for our images are the product name. So the product name should identify what the image is. The product label, the product image is only going to have one option here because we only have one column in this table that we labeled as a image URL, which again, we did that just a moment ago over here. Okay, after we did that data category, we now have the ability to change the default image to image. And that's just the name of my column. Once that's complete, hit OK. And I'm going to save these model changes back out, and we'll review a couple things that we've done that have improved our report. So I'm going to go back to SharePoint, launch open our report again. Okay, and tell it I want to edit this report. Now we fixed a couple things. So we actually did like 2 or 3 things there. So let me make sure we review what we did and make sure and show you how we fixed those problems that we had earlier. The first thing we did was we hid the columns that were identified as IDs. So you'll see in the sales table, we no longer have 6 different columns here. We just have the ones that we want to aggregate by. Remember we had in here date ID, region ID, product ID. We hid those columns so they're not visible in the client view anymore. The other thing we fixed was for the month number column. Remember it had the little aggregate symbol next to it? We changed the summarize by property so that it didn't summarize it anymore. And now we're no longer seeing the summarize icon next to it. We just know that it's a number, and we want to display it as a number and not try and aggregate it. Okay, so those were the 2 things we fixed. The other thing was we added in product images. So underneath our product table, we now see image and product name have this new icon next to it. Product name is my label. Remember we had the label property? And then my image is the actual image value here. So you see these 2 new icons that are next to image and product name. That's for my label and my image here. All right, so I'll select the product name and the image, bring that into the report. And I might want to flip these around a little bit. And we can see that we're now able to bring those product names in because previously we were actually getting a URL here. After we changed that table behavior property, we're now getting in the actual images. Now there's multiple ways that you can view this. There's actually a nice visualization for images called card. So there's this other visualization here called card, which is kind of a baseball card view of your data. And it gives you a nice little way to represent your data in here. And now I can bring in other information like demographics. Really anything else that I care to include in here, I can now check off, and it shows it in this little card view here, which basically it just allows me to have more information about the products that we're looking at. By the way, everything still interacts, so I can still interact with my chart here, and it filters down not only my products, but still that old chart that we had from the beginning. So everything interacts based on relationships in the data source. All right, so I told you you can do multiple views. Let's do another view of my data. To do multiple views, again, it's like another page. I can go over to the far left here, hit the arrow, and tell it that I want to create a new view here. Okay? And let's represent our data here a little bit differently. I like looking at my data over time, but I want to see this time something more interesting as far as analyzing data across time. So what I'd like to do is I'm going to bring in multiple types of measurements. So I have all these different measurements of my data underneath my sales table. I have the revenue, I have the profitability, and I have the quantity. And I want some kind of chart that can represent these all on the same chart fairly nicely. I also want to be able to analyze this by my product categories. And again, I said I want to see this over time, so I need to bring in month. Okay. So we've got a table view of this, but there's really a nice way to visualize this as well, and it's called a scatter chart. If I select the scatter chart up top here, and let's go ahead and full screen this. Okay. Now it's done some things here that probably don't make sense as far as it's trying to give me a bubble for every month that I have. But really the way I probably want to represent this is you can see in the bottom right I can change how this is visualized. Right now it's visualizing month as the color of the charts, but rather than doing that I think I'd rather do month as the play axis. What that does for me is it allows me to create an animated chart. This scatter chart that we're looking at here I can actually animate, and you can tell that because there's a little play button in the bottom left. I can animate this and see over time by month how each of my product categories are doing. And by simply hitting the play button here, we'll see over time how each of my product categories are doing. And let me go ahead and pause that. And I can highlight any one of those paths and actually see across the entire time frame, or across the entire time that I have data for, how they're really doing. And you can highlight it, and I can highlight this guy here as well and see how he's doing over time. So it gives you the ability to see at any point in time how my product is doing. I can hover over any one of these bubbles. I can select multiple bubbles and see and do some comparisons here across my different product categories. Okay. One more thing I want to show you. We're running out of time here. We're going to create one more view of my data. In this view, I'm going to again leverage my images. So those were inside my product table. And there's a way that you can leverage these images for filtering, and it's called tiles. Very kind of similar to if you've looked at any of the fruit tools, non-Microsoft tools, that Apple basically. But it gives you the ability to kind of filter through each of your products, and based on what you have inside this big box that I expanded across the entire design surface, I'm able to do some comparisons on my data. So if I wanted to see how my sales were doing for a particular product, I can now leverage the image filter that I created called a tile. And I'm kind of doing this last part a little fast because we're running out of time, and I do want to save some time for questions. But I can easily now bring in different data elements, compare my region sales for a particular product. So remember I had regions in here. I can go grab regions and pull that back in. I could have a region map as well if I had used my images. And it really gives me some capabilities here to analyze and do some filtering in an interactive way. So remember how I call this more of a data exploration tool? It truly is, because I'm able to do this different filtering and move across my report very easily. Now one thing, I'm not going to have time to show you everything here today. One other thing that's really neat as well is it does handle geographical data as well. So I have here and you can see it automatically picked this up. You see the little globe icon next to my state name. It automatically picks up geography types and will allow you to do things like reporting based on a map. So I had state as one of my dimensions here. I clicked the state column and told it I wanted to visualize it as a map, and I'm visualizing my data as a map here. And I can do different kind of bubble charts based on that as well. So with the last few minutes here, I do want to save a couple minutes for questions. With the last couple minutes that we have here, let's talk about the end user experience. So this is how it's viewed as a developer. How would an end user take this and be able to view it? So I've saved the report. Let's take this from more of the end user experience, how they're going to see the report. Now what you saw today, I think any end user will be able to handle. Now I did just a couple clicking. If I had not been talking, we could have had that done in less than 10 minutes. But I'm able to see my report here now in my Powerpivot Gallery. I can select the report, and I can view it here as well. So I'm going to do a little full screen here. Okay, this is what one of the user experiences can be. I can select the report. I can make the font larger here. This is a new add-in for 2013. If you're using SharePoint 2013, there's a little button in the bottom left that will help it make it be a little easier to visualize the data. You can increase the size. I also have the ability to preview each of my reports down below here before I select it. So I can select any one of these reports just based on the preview. Say I wanted to see this scatter chart again. I can bring that back up. The last thing I'll show you here before we'll do questions is I can also export this to PowerPoint. So if I wanted to, I could save this to a PowerPoint slide deck, save it onto my desktop, for example. Okay. I'll save it on my desktop, call it PW Demo. And now I can go open up that new slide deck that we just created and show it interactively. So it'll actually keep the data interactive whenever you're showing this new slide deck. It's not going to be static data. There's a button here in the bottom right. As soon as I hit that, it's going to reach out to my SharePoint server and make sure that I can connect to the data. In this case, it's going to ask me to log in. It's because it's a different domain, guys. Normally it wouldn't ask you to do this. And once I log in, it'll reach out to the data source, pull back in the results, and from a PowerPoint slide deck, I can now interact with the report, just as if I was viewing it on the SharePoint site. Okay, so I'm in a PowerPoint slide deck. I can still do things like select the columns and interact with it here. Very cool stuff. Very, very neat that you're able to do that within this new tool. Okay, so let's kind of wrap up here. Let me pull this back up, and we'll finish on any questions you guys have. Let me go ahead and pull this all the way to the end. By the way, I did share this slide, really slide presentation here with you as well. I tweeted about it, and I'll put it on my blog as well. My blog is at devonknightsql.com.